Welcome to Dataless You. I'm Paul, coming to you from Brooklyn. Today we're going to take a look at the work of John Cheever. So, for starters, I'm going to mix a martini. Seems only appropriate, given Cheever's predilection for martinis. There we go. Cheers. Today we're going to pay particular attention to one of my favorite John Cheever stories, and that's Goodbye, My Brother. I'm joking about the martinis and the copious martinis in Cheever's work, but it is true that Cheever wrote a great deal about alcoholics and affairs and corruption under the surface of Westchester suburban life. But the point I'd like to make today is that Cheever was a poet of beauty, of courage, of the finer things in life, of the smell of burning wood on an autumn evening, of an early morning swim in the cold Atlantic Ocean on a hot summer day. We're going to look at the first story in Cheever's Pulitzer Prize-winning collection, The Stories of John Cheever, published in 1978. It won not only the Pulitzer, but the National Book Critics Circle Award and the National Book Award. First, let's look at just a few facts of Mr. Cheever's life. He was born in 1912, died in 1982. Was born and raised in Massachusetts, lived in Manhattan and Westchester County for much of his life. In fact, he's called the Chekhov of the suburbs because, like Chekhov, he was most famous for his short stories and because he focused his efforts on the suburbs. There's a famous legend about John Cheever when he lived with his family in East Midtown, in Sutton Place, actually. He would wake and shower and shave and have breakfast and coffee with his family. He would get dressed in his suit and tie and take the elevator downstairs all the way to the basement where he would go into the maid's room, hang his suit and tie and pants up on a hanger because it was hot in there. There was probably a boiler in there. And he would sit at a desk and write until lunchtime. Cheever was renowned for this kind of work ethic and for treating writing like a job. He was a big-time New Yorker writer, and as I already mentioned, he won the big three prizes for American writers. Cheeveresque, Cheeverian, has become an adjective in the world of literature, and we're going to look particularly at the theme of light versus dark, of the duality of human nature. Cheever wrote extensively about this struggle between man's mind or conscience and his flesh or his passions. Note also the common settings, plots, and motifs in Cheever's stories. Again, the suburbs, the Upper East Side of Manhattan, as well as Atlantic Ocean towns, the dabbling of Italy. And in any story, you'll find the sea or the martini, the commuter train, cocktail parties, or often his stories begin with a father coming home to his family. But let's take a close look and begin our investigation of Goodbye, My Brother. It's the first story in this well-known collection. And the opening line is, "We are a family that has always been very close in spirit." This sets the stage for the battle between brothers in this well-known story. We have the narrator, and he represents lightheartedness, goodness, and appreciation of the beauty of life. And in many ways, this does represent Cheever's early phase, because in this narrator, we have the classic sophisticated, sensitive person who is going to share with us his perspective of the world and indeed his criticisms of his own brother, whose name is Lawrence, and how Lawrence sees the world. Lawrence in this story represents darkness or gloominess, a certain kind of negative thinking. And in fact, the very crux of the story is Lawrence's way of thinking. Let's take a look here at how Cheever sets it up. He says, "My brother looked to me then like a Puritan cleric. Sometimes when I try to understand his frame of mind, I think of the beginnings of our family in this country, the harshness of their thought. Man is full of misery, and all earthly beauty is lustful and corrupt. I think it is a trial of the spirit to reject its habits of guilt, self-denial, taciturnity, and penitence, and it seemed to me to have been a trial of the spirit in which Lawrence had succumbed." So here we have the presentation, the full presentation of Lawrence and his gloomy cast of mind. To tell you a little bit more about the story, as we look at a picture here of Mr. Cheever, and spoiler alert, I will tell you the whole story. Lawrence, the brother, hasn't seen the family in many years. He's relocated to Cleveland with his own family, and is back for this Atlantic seashore town vacation. And in short, he's just the kind of bastard that never has anything nice to say. He complains about the crappy shingles that the father put on the beach house so many years ago. He complains about the promiscuity, or what he perceives as promiscuity, of his own sister, who's taken a new lover. He complains about the way his sister-in-law flirts, rather innocently, with other members of the family over a game of backgammon, which in fact is another thing. He cannot abide the gambling that the family engages in the evening hours over some backgammon. Lawrence can't stand the way his family members drink, the way they enjoy their cocktails. So you get the picture. Lawrence is negative, and I want to pause because I find that this crux between Lawrence and the narrator, between darkness and light, is to me the essence of Cheever. Again, that Cheever is going to tell us a story of lightness triumphing over darkness. Cheever has a bit of a bad reputation, again, about writing about all kinds of sordid affairs and drunks and you know, the corrupt unhappiness that pervades Westchester's suburban life. And of course, in his own life, Cheever was an alcoholic. He also was bisexual, and of course, being a married man, this got him into a certain degree of trouble. But we're not really going to pay too much attention to the autobiography, or sorry, to the biography of Cheever. We'll leave that to his biographers. The point is, although there is this veneer, and certainly all of those themes are present in Cheever's work, I want to take a moment to emphasize how he was a champion of light and beauty. So let me share with you a moment when the narrator is setting out to a party with his wife. And yes, there are unhappy couples in other Cheever stories, but look at this moment when the narrator, the husband, sees his wife dressing. Now they're going off to a fancy cocktail party at the club, and the narrator has his old football uniform on, and his wife is putting on her old wedding gown. This is on page 15. "My wife, Helen, is 38, and her hair would be gray, I guess, if it were not dyed. But it is dyed an unobtrusive yellow, a faded color, and I think it becomes her. I mixed cocktails that night while she was dressing, and when I took a glass upstairs to her, I saw her for the first time since our marriage in her wedding dress. There would be no point in saying that she looked to me more beautiful than she did on our wedding day, but because I have grown older and have, I think, a greater depth of feeling, and because I could see in her face that night both youth and age, both her devotion to the young woman that she had been, and the positions that she had yielded graciously to time, I think I have never been so deeply moved. A beautiful portrait of the love between husband and wife. So they go to this party and they have a grand old time. And in fact, it turns out pretty much everyone's there in their old football uniforms or their wedding dresses. And Cheever gives us this portrait of the very end of the party to give you a sense of what I see as the Cheeveresque spirit. Chucky Ewing went running after the balloons. So a bunch of balloons have been let out of the big doors of the ballroom. Chucky Ewing went running out after the balloons, and when he saw them pass the dock and settle on the water, he took off his football uniform and dove in. Then Eric Auerbach dove in, and Lou Phillips dove in, and I dove in. And you know how it is at a party after midnight when people start jumping into the water. We recovered most of the balloons and dried off and went on dancing, and we didn't get home until morning. This, to me, this celebration of life, of joy, of both youth and maturity, of the love between husband and wife, of water, this, to me, is the mark of Cheever. So, here's what happens. Lawrence, the grumpy brother, goes on being annoyed at everything, and our narrator is essentially unable to let it go. He's very annoyed by his brother and his brother's gloomy cast of mind. And like all good Cheever stories, this comes to a head. In fact, Cheever was a kind of maximalist in his own way. At the time, there was a lot of slice-of-life stories being published, and these little scenes that you might get out of a Raymond Carver. But Cheever wanted to tell a full story, and he always did. And so here we have a bona fide Aristotelian climax. The two brothers are on the beach as night falls, as day turns into night. And they get in an altercation, and the narrator takes a rock and bangs it over his brother's head, and his brother falls into the sand, and the waters wash up over him, and there's blood in his hair. And the narrator leaves his brother there on the beach and goes back up to the house. Of course, when Lawrence finally gets himself up and returns to the house, there's a scene, and he declares that he's had enough, and he's leaving, and he's saying goodbye. And he indeed packs up his family and leaves on the first boat the next morning. So Cheever is not speaking in abstract terms here. He's talking about the battle between light and dark, between light-heartedness and gloominess, between embracing life and rejecting it, in very concrete, physical, real terms. To Cheever, it is a battle that must be waged every day within our own souls. So he leaves us in the last paragraph with the narrator looking out his window after his brother has already left, and with the narrator struggling still with thoughts of his brother, and also looking out at his wife and sister swimming. And I will leave you with this paragraph. It's one of the most beautiful paragraphs in American letters. Oh, what can you do with a man like that? What can you do? How can you dissuade his eye in a crowd from seeking out the cheek with acne, the infirm hand? How can you teach him to respond to the inestimable greatness of the race, the the harsh surface beauty of life? How can you put his finger for him on the obdurate truths before which fear and horror are powerless? The sea that morning was iridescent and dark. My wife and my sister were swimming, Diana and Helen, and I saw their uncovered heads black and gold in the dark water. I saw them come out, and I saw that they were naked, unshy, beautiful, and full of grace, and I watched the naked women walk out of the sea. Here's to Mr. Cheever. Cheers. This paragraph, to my ear, summarizes Cheever's attempt to bring what he calls in another story the perfume of life into our lives. And for that, I say cheers to Mr. Cheever. Thank you for joining me. We've looked at John Cheever's Goodbye, My Brother, and I will see you in the next video.